Greetings and welcome to the latest event in our Gies College of Business Global Challenges in Business webinar series. I'm Rob Towner, Director of Business Development here at University of Illinois, Gies College of Business, and I look forward to spending the next hour with you. Our faculty experts at Gies have developed this series of webinars to address the business implications of coronavirus and enable you to be prepared for the challenges it presents. We hope that you not only gain some knowledge and strategies to weather the storm, but succeed through it. Before we get started with Data is Your Best Defense in a Downturn by Professor Douglas Laney, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items related to the Q&A portion of today's session. Please submit all of your questions via the Zoom Q&A feature. Your questions will be submitted publicly for everyone in attendance to see. In order to help develop consensus around which questions get presented, please use the upvoting feature located in the Q&A. You can use the upvote thumb located next to the question in the Q&A window. You can only vote once, but you can change your vote. We will be bringing the top questions to Professor Laney following this presentation. Any general housekeeping questions will be answered in the text chat by the Gies team working in the background. Questions submitted via the chat will not be taken to Professor Laney. It is my privilege to introduce today's presenter, Doug Laney. Doug heads up the data and analytics strategy practice for the consultancy Caserta and is part of the accounting faculty here at Gies, which are ranked #1 in the nation by the BYU Faculty Research Rankings. Doug quite literally originated the field infonomics, pioneering methods to quantify the economic value of information and applying asset management practices to information assets. That's why he's widely recognized as the father of infonomics. There's no better person we could have brought to discuss this important webinar topic. Please join me in welcoming Professor Douglas Laney.
Thanks, Rob, and hey, everyone. Good morning from Chicago, and thank you all for joining us today. I do hope that you and your families are all safe and well. So you know what basketball announcers would have been saying last month as of course, the Illini won the NCAA championship. I'll have to save that for next year. Anyway, they'd be saying that the best offense is a good defense. Well, you know, at the moment, I think we need to kind of flip that script a little bit. While most organizations are going into quite a bit of a defensive posture right now, I believe there's really good reason, especially right now, for your team to kind of set some picks and take it to the hoop as if it were. But first, for those of you who are interested in connecting with me further on this or any of the topics that I talk about today, here's some ways to do so, including my emails. Also later this month, I'm going to start teaching infonomics again in the MBA and MSA program. The course, minus the topical live sessions and graduate credits, is also available on Coursera. It's mostly based on the business book I published a couple years ago while an analyst at Gartner on how to monetize, manage, and measure information as an actual corporate asset. We're going to touch on each of these topics a little bit today. And in addition to teaching at the university, as Rob said, my full-time role is leading the strategy practice with the boutique data and analytics consultancy, Caserta, where we help organizations apply many of these kinds of concepts. Also, if you're interested, we're currently offering complimentary consultations to IT, data, and business executives on how to continue evolving their data and analytics capabilities in this new world which we're living. So, this isn't the first crisis like this. So let's take a look at another one decades ago for a little perspective and perhaps a little inspiration. Over 3.5 centuries ago, from 1665 to 1666, the Black Death ravaged Europe. And in London, over a quarter of the population would die of the plague. And in order to temper the tragedy, like we're doing today, many institutions decided to institute a practice that today we're calling social distancing. Now, this included a particular prestigious university some 60 miles north of London, the University of Cambridge. And just as many of our kids today have been sheltering and studying at home, one particular mediocre math student, we'll get to a story about another mediocre math student in a bit, me, he decided to spend his time quite productively. And in fact, during this time, he invented calculus, the law of gravity and breakthrough theories on optics. And then returning to Cambridge in 1667 with these theories in hand, he was made a fellow, and then a couple years later a professor, really without any regard to whether he'd even changed out of his pajamas and bathed before noon while working from home. So I hope all of you, including the organizations you work for, are considering what kinds of major advances you're going to make during this time, rather than just kind of standing pat. So some quick thoughts on calculus. Some of you alums and faculty may remember the revered mathematics department professor Kenneth Apple, who sadly passed away a few years ago. On the first day of his differential equations class, it was one of my more memorable and life-changing moments. As soon as we were all seated, Professor Apple grabbed a handful of chalk and then he turned his back on the class. And for the next 40 minutes, he filled every vertical and horizontal sliding chalkboard in Altgeld Hall, in the classroom with the equations. And before the bell rang, what he did was he turned around, covered with chalk dust, and asked us if we knew what that was. And we looked at each other stunned, but gleaning that it was some kind of proof, we started listing any kind of what's called an NP-complete or unsolvable math problem that we could think of, like the traveling salesman problem or Fermat's last theorem. And after we gave up, he told us that this was the proof of the four-color map problem that he and a colleague had proved a decade earlier. So you see, cartographers had long known that you only needed a maximum of 4 colors to color a map with no adjoining geographies having the same color. So it was at this precise moment that I decided to change majors to focus on computer science and business administration. I was actually kind of more interested in the business aspects of computing and technology and data. So I probably should have dropped the class, but I was too stubborn, and I did end up passing it barely. So interestingly, I later learned that this proof of Professor Apple's was the first such proof that was confirmed by computer. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, so I'm not here to disparage calculus at all. Today calculus has become an indispensable tool for professionals in every industry. Physicists use calculus to find the center of mass of a sports utility vehicle, to design appropriate safety measures and adhere to federal specifications on different kinds of road surfaces and different speeds and weather conditions. Biologists use differential calculus to determine the exact rate of growth in bacterial cultures when different variables such as temperature and food sources are changing. Banks even use calculus to set minimum payments for credit card statements at the exact time the statement is processed by considering multiple variables like changing interest rates and fluctuating available balance and so forth. Doctors and lawyers use calculus to help build the discipline necessary for solving complex problems like diagnosing patients or planning prosecutions. And of course, epidemiologists rely on calculus to determine how far and fast a disease like COVID-19 is spreading and where it may have originated from and how to best treat it. I know we all look at kind of the pretty basic charts for these things, but there's a lot of heavy math that goes into it behind the scenes.
Hey, Doug, I just wanted to.
You're sharing your slides.
We doing okay? I hear some mics on.
Yeah, Doug, can you share your slides real quick?
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, let's do that. I turned on my mic and video, but didn't share the slides.
All good.
All right. I'll share the contact information again later as well. How's that?
We're seeing your slides just fine.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so we talked about calculus. So calculus is basically the tool to calculate the rate of change of something according to something else, usually time. And since literally everything is always changing, everything will have something to do with calculus. And boy, are things changing right now. All right, but even when calculus formulas are known, new variables and new data emerge. And the problem is that there can be a bottleneck between the data collection and the analyzing or the analysis stages, especially in times like these where there's a desire to get more data and analyze more variables. And it can lead to what we call analysis paralysis. Yet when the global economy and those variables that impact your own business are changing rapidly, do you really have time to sit and wait for more data or deeper analysis? Or worse, can you afford to sit on the analysis already at hand? Probably not if you want to survive or even thrive. And while it may seem like you're being cautious, it can actually have some serious negative and lasting impact on your projects or even your business as a whole. Analysis paralysis can lead to any number of issues like lost opportunities or a lost time to market for services or products, or lost market share, or losing the trust of your employees and partners, which I'll talk about in a bit. Failing projects or the business, or even the loss of life, as we've already seen by countries whose leaders and others have been paralyzed for one reason or another, or have even made decisions while ignoring available data. I don't think any of us can afford any of these things to happen to our businesses this year. So in uncertain global markets like what we're experiencing as a result of the fallout from not only the coronavirus, but also the recent OPEC foobar, which seems to have resolved itself. What do inexperienced or unnerved business leaders tend to do? Well, they do things like they hunker down, or they tighten the belt, or they jettison the ballast, or worse, they just stay the course. Why do they do that? Because they're strategically paralyzed. Or on the other hand, we find that more experienced and steely leaders take to heart what M.F. Weiner first wrote, coincidentally in a 1976 medical journal, "Don't Waste a Crisis." I know that was also popularized by Rahm Emanuel when he was chief of staff for Obama as well. But it actually dates back to the 1976 medical journal. But anyway, how does one understand a crisis and anticipate and take advantage of its ramifications? I think in a word, it's data. Most crises are unique and remain, not entirely predictable in a lot of ways. These are times of great uncertainty, but everything can be predicted to some kind of degree. And while it may make sense to push the pause button on particular kinds of capital expenditures, we believe that investments in data and analytics perhaps should be accelerated, not abated at times like these. So, here's kind of a fun little slide that you can use to kind of gauge where your own organization is. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it kind of gives you a sense of a continuum of where various organizations are on their path to becoming much more data-driven or information savvy, or whatever you want to call it. A lot of organizations tend to be kind of in the middle of the pack right here, where they're using data to enhance the performance of their business. They're not really architecting the business around data or using data to truly transform the business. That's fairly rare right now. A lot of companies talk about that, but not many organizations are actually doing it. Are they using data to invent new offerings, or even directly monetizing data, as we'll talk about later on, which means a lot more than just selling data. But at the bottom here, there's still organizations that are just kind of accumulating data or careless with data. And so when you think about your kind of journey to become more data driven, you kind of consider where you are along this path. So let's talk for a moment about, I mentioned uncertainty earlier. Most crises are unique and remain unpredictable in a lot of ways. These are times of great uncertainty. But certainty, or at least a degree of it via predictable activity, can be gleaned from a deterministic chain of responses. Things that one thing leads to another, and taken advantage of. And in fact, the definition of information itself, dating back to the days of the father of information theory, named Claude Shannon. Some of you may have studied him. Shannon specifically cites information as being that which reduces uncertainty, leading to chaos. So that is the effects of entropy. Now, you don't need to understand Shannon's seminal formula to appreciate the resulting revolutionary advances in communication and data compression. Yes, you can thank Claude Shannon for all those zip files you have on your hard drive. Nor do you need to really grok the formula to understand how more accurate, complete, faster, integrated, and unique information can be used to improve business processes or decisions. However, as I wrote in my Infonomics book, we need to keep in mind that increasingly decisions are made not by humans, but by machines. We're still spending a lot of time developing pretty pie charts and bouncy bar charts and dashing dashboards that are directed at eyeballs, not really architecting data solutions sufficiently enough for consumption by machines and algorithms. So I think, we really need to start architecting systems to deliver information in new ways that take advantage of technology's ability to consume information in ways that humans cannot. For example, I wrote about the various economic considerations for information like marginal utility. Well, machines don't feel marginal utility the way that, or they don't experience it the way that humans do. So the way that we're publishing information might differ when we're pushing data out to an algorithm or an application than we are to an individual. But anyway, I digress. So land, labor, and capital as factors of production were originally identified by the early economists like Adam Smith and David Ricardo and even Karl Marx. But today, still today, most economic textbooks still claim that capital and labor remain the two primary inputs of the productive process, and that the generation of they lead to the generation of profits by a business. As you might imagine, based on what I teach and what I've written and researched, I would disagree. And others would as well. For example, the intellectual property firm here in Chicago, Ocean Tomo, has been analyzing what contributes to corporate value and productivity over the past several decades. And they've concluded that intangible assets generate over 80% of the value of corporations today, whereas in the 1970s, 80% of the value was in the form of physical assets. So a tremendous shift the last 40 or 50 years that I just don't think a lot of professions have really kept up with. However, as we've seen in the past couple of decades, good data in its various forms like analytics and insights and predictions and prescriptive analytics and so forth, often is a lower cost substitute for inventory, for property, and even for money. Uber and Lyft, for example, have substituted information about who needs a ride and who has a car for fleets of taxis. And Airbnb and HomeAway have done the same kind of thing for inventories of bedrooms. And even most traditional retailers and manufacturers have been able to reduce their inventory levels, some to just-in-time inventory based on detailed near real-time supply and demand information. So let's talk about a variety of ways where information can be a substitute for something else. Well, speaking of supply, I would ask you, how well do you really understand your own business's supply chain? Of course we know who our suppliers are, I hear you exclaim, but do you really know your suppliers' production capacities or costs at different levels of capacity that can affect your own business? Do you know who their suppliers are or who their suppliers' suppliers are, and how resilient these businesses are to changing economic conditions? Most automakers and airline manufacturers, for example, have up to like 6 levels or more of supply chain visibility, or what's often called N-tier visibility into their supply chain. You don't have to have this kind. I was going to say, if you don't have this kind of information, you should strongly consider collecting it, buying it, bartering for it, and then plugging it into your own value chain model. Furthermore, how well have you used available information to identify and line up alternate suppliers in the event that one falters or can't deliver your widgets, because its borders are closed or workers have been quarantined or transportation methods are halted? Or what if one of your suppliers has just been flagged for, say, a human rights issue? Will you be among the first to know or the last to know? Also, company financial and operational risk levels from unclear visibility into their supply base are like, you can liken it to like investors taking positions in mutual funds without understanding or optimizing the diversity of their own portfolio. So the same thing with demand. Let's look at the demand side. How well are you tracking things like customer sentiment, customer purchasing power, competitor pricing, or service changes, or any hundreds of thousands of global economic factors affecting demand for your goods and services in real time and over some kind of extended horizon, which is really kind of difficult right now because of the degree of uncertainty. There are a burgeoning selection of data product companies and data marketplaces and data exchanges and specialized analytic solution providers that have emerged, and they offer an array of alternate data sources that can provide unique insights if integrated well. I'll talk a little bit about that a bit later. But the problem is that many companies have been relying on what's referred to as trend-based forecasting, which really only considers their own historical data, which is great if things are increasing and productivity is increasing at a kind of a steady rate, and the economy is somewhat predictable. That works fairly well and is a fairly easy model to build. But this type of analytic, what I call navel gazing, has resulted in broken forecasts and market conditions lately, brought on by the global pandemic, and they changed dramatically. So as a result, a lot of the companies that we're working with have had to toss out these trend-based models and are now scrambling to develop what are called driver-based models that consider the economic forces that represent leading indicators of their business externally. These kinds of models are somewhat complex and take a lot of experimenting with data and advanced analytics to get right. One example is beer sales in China. So a major beverage manufacturer that we all know was having trouble with its forecasts in China even before the pandemic, and they just couldn't quite sort out what the demand was for beer, and so their forecasts were about 75% accurate. And so what they did was they started identifying, working with an analytics company called Previdary that has access to millions and millions of external data sets. So they worked with this company to identify the leading indicators of their business, and upgraded the analytic models to like 95% accuracy. So they stopped spilling beer or leaving money on the table by better understanding the 5 or 6 drivers of alcohol consumption in Asia that help them attune their forecasts. So the lesson here is that using one signal or even a handful of signals, especially from just your own data, is very 2005 and certainly doesn't cut it in a situation like what we're in right now. So by now, most of us have experienced the convenience of things like online banking or snapping photos of, and depositing checks from home, or making NFC payments with our phones, or we sent money instantly using Venmo or Zelle or PayPal, or made donations, directly through Facebook or Instagram, or even applied for jobs, or received CVs via LinkedIn, and of course we're holding a lot of meetings remotely. Data can, do things like transport us to the gym, to the bank, the store, or even a museum, or rather transport them to us in some way, I guess, depending on your perspective. So increasingly, people are choosing to, they have to, work out from home virtually. For example, with a monthly membership to a company like Veris, you can get unlimited, on-demand access to brands like Equinox and SoulCycle and Pure Yoga and so forth. And each class is an immersive, cinematic experience brought to life with dynamic multi-camera shots and concert-grade lighting, and kind of as much as they can mirrors the in-studio. So the app kind of transports your favorite instructors to your home in a way that tries to, again, approximate the in-studio experience. In the interest of full disclosure, the app I mentioned, Veris, is the back end was built by the firm Caserta that I work for, back end data architecture and integration. But there are other companies that do this, like Orange, which I subscribe to, also offers remote classes instruction as well. And so I think it's just important to think about what products and services you offer, and could, and now must, be converted into some kind of digital experience. Some people said, I posted this a while ago, who is behind your digital transformation? Is it your CIO? Is it your CDO? Is it your CIO? No, it's probably the COVID virus itself is precipitating a lot of these transformations to digital products and services. Another way to look at this is, experiencing things like conferences, especially when a lot of trepidation of gatherings and spreading disease and the handling of objects. Consider which of your physical products and kind of mano a mano services can be digitized or digitalized. Digitalization requires a lot of data too. Case in point, we recently held, we've been holding these infonomics and data governance summits around the country, including an event in Boston last month. But instead of canceling or postponing the event last month, as many have done, we opted to use Verbella's immersive 3D virtual conference center experience. It enables attendees to kind of create their own avatar, to roam around the conference facility, attend lectures. You can have one-on-one meetings or small private face-to-face gatherings, and even voice chat with people in your vicinity, as you would, in a live experience. It also enables presenters to upload and share presentations live with the audience, and there's even a beach where, if the presentations stink, you can, kick around a soccer ball and even take a power boat out for a spin with others. So it's kind of cool. They have an open campus if you want to check it out, or have a meeting with a few people to kind of experience it. So, the question is, are you canceling your user conferences or your company meetings? I know a lot of people are holding webinars on Zoom and elsewhere. But a lot of people are kind of getting tired of the Brady Bunch style webinars and perhaps meetings. So perhaps you should be looking for kind of an interactive, collaborative, morale boosting workspace for your employees. The people who attended this this online experience really were just raving about it. Just as something kind of new and different as well. So speaking of 3D. Data-fueled 3D printing is really taking off. And, for example, it's enabled General Electric, GE, to make parts for its new LEAP engine. 19 of the parts are now produced in a single print. It's one of the first passenger, I think it's the first passenger jet engine to use 3D printed fuel nozzles. Whereas each of these parts was once separately machined and then fused together to construct the nozzle's interior passageways. There's now only one piece that's built up by a layering of powdered materials melted and fused together through what's called direct metal laser melting. It actually makes each nozzle 5 times stronger than those made through general, the traditional kind of milling and welding and other what are called subtractive manufacturing processes. I understand right now 3D printing businesses are doing really, really well. So, something certainly to consider for your own business. If you're a manufacturer, it might be time to consider how to kind of take time and expense out of your own manufacturing while also even improving quality, which is not something a lot of people, realize. So another example here, and I've been compiling examples of data and analytics, how data and analytics are being used in innovative and high value ways for a number of years. I have a library of nearly 500 examples of how companies are using data and analytics. And so some of these are my kind of compendium. Again, if anybody's interested in seeing some of these examples or using them to inspire your own business, you just reach out to me. We do talk through a number of them in the class as well. So Joy Global is a Fortune 1000 company that manufactures and services heavy machinery used in underground and surface mining. And the company also deals in aftermarket parts. But by installing sensors in the machines, they're able to notify customers when the machines need replacement parts or service without having somebody go out and inspect them. Again, which in today's world introduces a bit of pandemic-oriented risk. So another one of my favorite stories, since it's Cinco de Mayo, is in Mexico. So you may be familiar with the Mexican national oil refinery, oil company, Pemex. Now, some years ago, they had some issues with their refinery being shut down due to the failure of one or more components in the refinery. And so they asked the engineers in the refinery, what is it, how do we know when a part is about to fail or a component is about to go bad? And the engineers said, oh, hace ruido, it makes noise. So they said, well, all right, well, what makes noise is vibration. So what they did was they installed vibration sensors throughout the refinery and were able to identify baseline readings. And then they were able to identify when parts were about to fail or components were about to fail, and were able to deal with them much more proactively. This allowed them to increase the uptime of the refinery and reduce manual replacements not manual replacement, but manual inspection of parts and maintain an additional, I think it was 2,000 hours of uptime for the refinery refineries per year. So that's pretty significant. More to, the actual kind of customer side of things, and perhaps not quite right now in a live setting, but data can be used to identify and understand customers or even folks that you maybe don't want as a customer. And of course, a lot of companies are doing this online and tracking folks, but a couple more kind of live examples I thought I would share. One is when Taylor Swift played the Rose Bowl in May, a kiosk was set up for her adoring fans to view videos of her. But it appears that there may have been more to that video screen than met the eye. The somewhat innocent-looking kiosk also took photos of people who were watching the videos. And then the images were sent back to a command post in Nashville, where they were cross-referenced using facial recognition technology with a database of people who had been identified as stalkers of the pop star, and then alerting the on-site security personnel. Or perhaps let's consider a more positive story. Consider Burberry, whose salespeople are armed with tablets that alert them to known customers as soon as they enter the store. Now, it's becoming a little bit more common in other kinds of upscale stores as well. They're alerted to the customer's previous orders and returns or preferences. And the other thing that Burberry has is these kind of magic mirrors or smart mirrors that when a customer holds up or tries on an item, it can tell the customer about the item, including its materials, its uses, or whether it's available in the customer size or preferred colors. So a couple of cool examples there of how to interact with customers a little bit better. So let's talk about value chains. It's hard to go a week without hearing a consultant or a pundit talk about the intersection of people and process and technology. And you can probably guess what I think is missing from that. Again, it's data. So the question is, how in the world can an organization today understand its value chain without understanding the flow of data? TV detectives always talk about following the money, right? Well, I think to understand a business today, you really need to also be able to follow the data. So combining the familiar relationships of people, process, technology, and yes, data, we're able to define our business and clearly understand the relationships that drive value, thereby enabling us to model tweaks or reinvent aspects of our business to measure their impact, especially in times like these. In this way, an organization can invest thousands of dollars before committing to millions of dollars. And even the financial value of data itself can be determined using this approach, this kind of approach. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So by way of example, one of the leading US broadband providers has an extensive portfolio, of course, of advanced services, including like high-speed internet, data, voice, cloud, and cable. And they used a modeling tool from a company called Link, L-I-N-Q there, based in Auckland, New Zealand. And what they're able to do is create what's called a digital twin of their hosted voice over IP sales and deployment process. And what this did is it helped them identify inefficiencies and quantify the impact of those inefficiencies on their business or the cost side of things. And so by modeling the value chain, they were able to find things like incomplete orders or manual data entry and multiple customer touch points that were somewhat redundant. And what this does is it revealed kind of the true operating costs of delivering the solution. But they didn't stop there. What they did next was they built a future state model identifying the process changes and the technology solutions, organizational changes, new kinds of data streams that could be leveraged, and anticipated or calculated using this approach that they were going to realize an estimated annual cost savings of over $1 million. So let me take a sip. Data, of course, is necessary to give visibility to executives so they can act with more precision, especially in a real volatile market like this one. But as I said, basic hindsight-oriented analytics like pie charts and bar charts and dashboards, the things like that, they rarely provide insights or move the needle on the business. In fact, this library of examples that I have almost maybe 2%, maybe 3% of the stories have anything to do with looking at hindsight-oriented analytics. They're all about forward-looking, diagnostic, predictive, or prescriptive kinds of solutions. But the thing I want to talk about is that a few years ago, while I was at Gartner, some of my colleagues, Dale Kutnick and Saul Brand, developed this concept of what's called an economic architecture. The concept is it's a brilliant method of defining an organization's prospective aspirational balance sheet. So kind of where do you want to be in the future, an income statement, and then architecting your business to achieve that over some kind of time horizon. As economic conditions change, so must your various financial goals and ratios that in turn dictate, how the business operates to achieve them. Especially today, this kind of method can really help organizations better define and shape their company coming out of the global crisis, rather than letting the crisis kind of define and shape their own company instead. So I encourage you to kind of look up this topic and learn about it. Especially if you're a CFO or operating on the financial side of things. Similarly, at the onset of the Great Recession, or I guess what we're going to call the first Great Recession, if we don't enter into a depression, I was working with BMC Software. BMC was one company whose leaders went even a step further. They developed a series of financial risk scenarios, color-coded scenarios that were easy to understand, red, yellow, green, blue, et cetera, based on particular economic triggers that they were ready to execute on at a moment's notice. As a result, the company was able to weather the storm a lot better than others, not just by being proactively reactive, if that's even a phrase, but by instilling confidence in their employees, their customers, and their investors. So the ability to define, to communicate, and to execute efficiently, to economically architect your business and employ things like economic scenarios definitely requires a lot of deep and broad data, not just internal data, but again, external data as well. So you can also use data to impress investors. Tobins Q, this is a ratio called Tobins Q. It's a simple ratio formulated or posited by Nobel laureate and American economist James Tobin in the 1960s. He created this metric to understand the relationship between a company's market value and the replacement value of its tangible assets. Some analysis that I did while I was at Gartner shows that this quotient has been growing since financial statements were standardized following the Great Depression. And this Q ratio, or Tobin's Q, has more than doubled since 1945. In fact, it's interesting to note that the ratio seems to have tripped in favor of market value over tangible asset replacement costs about the same time that data warehousing and business intelligence rose to mainstream popularity in the mid-1990s. So continuing this study, we found that companies demonstrating information savvy or data-driven kinds of behaviors, such as hiring chief data officers and data scientists and launching enterprise data governance programs, have a Q value that's nearly 2 times greater than the market average. And little surprise as these kinds of companies do more with fewer tangible assets. Information-based businesses like data brokers and others tend to enjoy Q values nearly 3 times greater than the market average. So, in short, investors see something special about data-driven and information savvy and information product kinds of companies. So, I'm not suggesting that your company becomes a information product company, but there are things that you can do to certainly digitalize your products and services, as I mentioned, and then in a bit I'll talk about ways to monetize your data as well. So let's talk about data valuation for a bit. In my, I'll blow this up here. In my Infonomics course, I share the data valuation models that I and colleagues developed over the years in collaboration with valuation experts and accountants and even clients like chief data officers. They say that you can't manage what you don't measure. And, I found that businesses that measure the quality and the relevance and the impact and the cost and the market value and or the economic value of their data assets tend to manage that data much more as an actual asset. And I think it also follows that, an asset that you're managing better is one that you can monetize or you can generate more value from. I'll get to that in just a moment. Unfortunately, and here I'm going to disparage the accounting industry a little bit. Unfortunately, because of what I consider to be arcane and archaic accounting standards, and even some folks on the FASB board do as well, data is not yet, I'll say yet because I expect it to be at some point, a balance sheet asset, even though it clearly meets the criteria of one. That is, data, like other assets, can be owned or controlled. Data is exchangeable for cash. Data generates what accountants call probable future economic benefits. And so what I believe is that accounting standards, are kind of lagging the information age. Yet any organization aiming to become much more data-driven should really know or understand the potential and actual value, or be measuring it, of its data assets at any point in time. Interesting little plug for Illinois. To my understanding and to its credit, the Illinois Gies College of Business is the only MBA and accountancy program that even acknowledges data's value, let alone includes a course on how to calculate it off balance sheet, of course. I gotta throw that in there. So today, companies like AIG, Boeing, Vivint, Highways England, MISO Energy in Indiana, the Canadian National Library and Archives, and many others are starting to track the value of their data assets to do things like reduce associated costs for collecting and managing data, to improve the quality and governance of data, to create new value streams, to budget accordingly for data security, and even make what's called defensible deletion decisions for underperforming data, or when data's cost is greater than its actual or potential economic value. In short, these kinds of organizations are now managing data as an actual asset because they're able to measure it like one. Moreover, we're partnering with private equity firms, and I just published an article in Forbes on this a few days ago, to help private equity firms better assess the M&A deals or other corporate transactions. If you look at typical, and we did this, we looked at typical due diligence approaches that almost, most accounting firms and corporate transaction firms and private equity and VCs, they take this due diligence approach, almost entirely discounts the value of an acquisition target's or divestiture target's data value, or its quality issues, or even its overall data-related capabilities. So what we've done is, at Caserta, is we've introduced a process we call data diligence, and I'll be talking about this also in our upcoming Infonomics class that's starting this month. So especially as things like merger and acquisition and divestiture activity is expected to peak due to the unfortunate faltering of many businesses over the next year or two, having determined the value of your own corporate data assets could help you perhaps fetch a premium for your own company. And then finally, I think, this is the last kind of recommendation. There's really no better time than now to consider how to productize your data assets, if only to diversify them while demand for traditional products and services has dipped. Identifying ways to package and license data and insights about your customers, your markets, your suppliers, products, and services themselves is something that could generate some much needed revenue to kind of make up for some revenue loss. In fact, what we find is more than 30% of companies are already directly monetizing their data externally, and a lot of companies are thinking today about doing so as a way to kind of recover some of these lost revenue streams or value streams. Now, monetizing data isn't necessarily about selling it outright, and I think the industry sort of understands that well enough today. There are a variety of ways to generate what I call measurable economic value from your data, and not only from your data, but there's plenty of data out there to be gathered and integrated and monetized from billions of social media posts, from millions of data sets published by government organizations and others, to harvesting data from billions of websites. There's a lot of value in that freely available data as well, or data that you can trade or barter or gather from your suppliers or customers. So now, just a bit of economics for a second. Remember that data is what economists would call a non-rivalrous, non-depleting, and regenerative asset. That is, it's an asset that can and should be used in multiple ways. Okay, so that's non-rival, which you can use it in multiple ways simultaneously. You can use it again and again because when you do consume it, it doesn't deplete. And new data can be captured about processes that are using the data. So whenever you're using data, you're in a position to capture more data about when and where that data is used. This is how organizations can generate orders of magnitude greater returns on their data assets than just simply using them for a single operational purpose and then maybe reporting on them. So data can be monetized internally or indirectly to improve business process performance in, again, a variety of ways. But it can also be monetized externally, or what I call directly, to generate new revenue streams or be exchanged for commercial goods and services, or even allow you to contractually get beneficial commercial terms for things that you are, relationships that you're having with products, with customers or suppliers or partners. And if you think, people are like, well, we can't monetize our customer data today due to privacy regulations like the GDPR or the California Consumer Privacy Act. If you think that, you're actually sorely mistaken. Even if you can't sell or you can't license your data about your customers, let's say I can't, if I can't sell you or license you data about my customers, I can monetize it by offering you products and services, by offering your products and services to my customers and like taking a cut of the action or some kind of referral fee. So for example, we're working with a hospital. If you're a hospital, of course, you can't sell your patient data due to HIPAA regulations, but let's say who your diabetes patients are. You can introduce them to other businesses, at-home glucose monitoring kits or healthy meal plans or fitness programs. And in that way, you generate kind of a new revenue stream, or at least add value to the services and products that you're offering your own customers. So, we're working with companies that have identified tens of millions of dollars in ancillary value from their data assets via a combination of these methods. And we encourage folks not to just get fixated on one way of monetizing data, but again, because data is this non-rivalrous, non-depleting asset, you can monetize it in a variety of ways. All right, so let's wrap up and we'll take a few questions. And I think we're going to handle some questions offline as well. Rob will tell us a little bit more about how we're going to do that. So business executives and CIOs, today are being asked over the next few weeks and months to reconsider their IT budgets in the midst of the current kind of financial situation and crisis, and learn from what companies that have done, how they've weathered the last crisis. So there's things that can be learned. And so rather than slashing budgets wholesale, I would suggest that you consider shifting them into improved ways to measure and manage and monetize your data as a corporate asset, not as an expense. I talked to a lot of CIOs and chief data officers who lament that their entire operation is treated as an expense item rather than something that can generate revenue or generate measurable economic benefits for the organization. So even bolder than asking to retain budgets, you might even ask at times like this for increased budget to bring data and analytics to the rescue. So that kind of wraps things up. Again, I skipped this slide earlier, so I'll share it now. If you're interested in reaching me, here are some ways to reach out to me. A little bit about the course that I'm going to start teaching here again in the summer session. And we also teach the course over Coursera. Of course, you don't get the live sessions or anything with that as well. And the book is, of course, available in various formats. So listen, I'm glad you were all able to join the discussion. I hope you found it interesting and informative and inspirational. And I definitely look forward to connecting with any of you to explore any of these concepts further. I think we're now prepared to open it up to some questions in the remaining time there, Rob.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Laney. I think that the presentation was absolutely fantastic and
Pleasure.
Partnered so many great questions coming in here. We're going to use the upvoting metric, so I'll just be presenting to you the top most voted questions here to get some insight on. The number one most voted question is, what is the differences, or what are the differences between data analysis by using Pythons and marketing analysis?
Using Pythons?
That's what it says.
And marketing analysis. Well, Python is a tool for analytics. I'm not sure I can answer that question. That seems a bit of a non sequitur there.
Okay, no problem.
Let me Ask that one more time. Maybe I'll make sense of it.
Yeah, so what are the differences between data analysis by using Pythons and marketing analysis?
Yeah, I can't make sense of that question. Sorry, I don't know
No problem.
how that got upvoted. Yeah, one is a technology and one is a kind of capability. So let's move to the next one, please.
Absolutely. As a marketer, I need to collect data and analyze them for the campaigns to create my own audience. How can I learn the tactics on how to do that most effectively? Or do you have any tips or any insight for them on how
Yeah,
to do
I mean, there are obviously a lot of great books on doing marketing analytics. There is also some great research from Gartner on that. They have an entire team of people, of analysts who research that, those kinds of capabilities. I would say just in general, understanding your own customers involves not only looking at the activities of your own customers, but your prospective customers as well, and identifying what their kinds of interests are, how their behaviors are changing. There might also be, in times like these especially, leading indicators of customer behavior, things that customers typically do or buy or places they go before they develop a commercial interest in one of your products or services. There might be a product or service that they buy beforehand. So, kind of keep an eye on that. And what else I might say? You also might see some geographic differences. We've seen there's a company that formed here in Chicago years ago called Food Genius, and Food Genius harvested restaurant menu data from restaurants, and I think they had a relationship with Grubhub as well. And then they made that data available to restaurateurs and chefs to identify what kinds of foods, what kinds of ingredients were trending. So, for example, certain menu trends may start in New York or LA or Chicago and then go to other, kind of secondary markets. So it's something that they were able to track, and chefs could track, say, for example, when something like, white truffle oil was, becoming prevalent in dishes, and then maybe start adding that into their own, their own items. So that's just kind of one example. So that's something to look for. And those data sources are out there. As I mentioned, there are just tons of data sources out there, not only open data, but also at least 5,000 or so syndicated data brokers out there offering all sorts of data. That company, Food Genius, I mentioned, was acquired by US Foods a few years ago.
Thank you for
Okay,
that.
another question?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Sure.
the new top voted question after we had some confusion on the first one has gained a lot of traction is, which business, in your opinion, will boom tremendously after Corona COVID-19 pandemic, given their abilities with data and things along those lines?
After the business, well, we're certainly tracking the gaming industry is doing really well. The online, presentation businesses are doing well. Pretty much anything that's digitalized. Folks like Instacart, are going to do really well. I would say coming out of all of this, any kind of business that's offering a great combination of, or a way for customers to flow between a live in-person kind of experience and also a digital experience are going to do really well. So that kind of the multi-channel experience is great, but enabling customers to flow between those two ways of engaging is going to become really popular. Folks are going to say, listen, I'm really happy to do business with you in person, but I also want to be able to do business with you digitally, in case I need to. So looking at both sides of that equation and being able to flow customers between both modes of interaction is going to be really, really critical.
Perfect. I think
good question. Yeah.
I think we have two more great questions I'm going to give to you. So,
all right.
From one of our learners, they say one of the challenges they face with data in India is that it's very difficult to clean it. Do you have any thoughts or hacks around data preservation?
Oh, don't think you're special there, India. Companies in every geography have difficulties cleansing their data. Now, of course, there are providers like Axiom and Experian and others that can help you cleanse your data yourself, but it's really a difficult problem and something that, again, you're not going to get budget to do unless you can prove the economic value of having clean data. For example, we worked with, I mentioned AIG earlier, and the chief data officer at AIG, who I worked with back at Deloitte, took some of these valuation models that I developed to identify how data quality improvements yield or relate to business process performance improvements. So they can track how a 1% increase in data accuracy or a 3% increase in data completeness correlates to, or is a predictor of improved business process performance via the KPI measures, the key performance indicator measures for the business processes that use that data. Not only that, they took the data quality metrics and put them on the data in the data lake itself, so that when people are querying the data via what is called self-service analytics, they're able to see how far they can trust that data. So data quality is obviously a technical issue, and it differs depending on the kind of data, whether you're talking about customer data or transaction data or whatever. But measuring it, I think, is really important to be able to get the budget and the resources necessary to deal with it upstream as far as possible. Data quality is not something that you want to deal with downstream if you can at all avoid it. Unfortunately, it's the consumers of data are the ones that suffer and have that onus, but it really should be upstream and the responsibility of data producers to maintain data quality at a level of what we call fit for purpose. So no real, pat answer to that other than, if you're not measuring your data quality and the impact on the business, then you're going to be in a poor position to get the resources necessary to deal with it.
Awesome. Last question we're going to take
Sure.
for you here today is, what kind of data analysis tools are likely to gain popularity in the near future due to COVID?
Yeah. I would say that, and again, I don't know if it's necessarily related to COVID. All right, let's talk about that for a minute. So probably data analysis tools that are able to ingest a wide variety of data assets. Years ago, when we were talking about big data, I came up with the concept of defining big data in terms of increasing volume, velocity, and variety of data. And increasingly, it's the variety of data that's the biggest challenge. It's a data quality challenge. It's an analytic challenge. So data analysis tools that can deal with a wide variety of data and a changing variety of data are ones that are going to become much more prevalent. I would say that my former colleague, Cindy Howson, who's now with ThoughtSpot, is one of the thought leaders on the topic of augmented analytics. And so augmented analytics takes into consideration a few different kinds of capabilities, like voice query. Okay, so that's one of them, to be able to query by voice or natural language. Another one is to automatically surface insights rather than having the individual or the human having to drill into them. So something automatically issue results or insights. Another thing that, speaking of natural language, that we'll see becoming much more prevalent, because storytelling is becoming very big, rather than just sharing pie charts and bar charts, but being able to tell a story behind the data is really important. We'll see natural language generation capabilities and analytic tools become much more prevalent as well. But I think in dealing with the virus and changing economic conditions, things that can ingest and analyze a wide variety of data are going to be the ones that will win out in the end.
Awesome. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.
We really appreciate all of your great insights today, and thank you to all of our participants today for attending our webinar and bringing some great questions to the table. Professor Laney has graciously agreed to do a write-up on some of the non-asked questions we could get through today, and we will get that sent out to you after the webinar. We hope that you have gained some valuable knowledge today, and we hope that you will join us for our next webinar in this series, which is Tuesday, May 19th at noon Central. Professor Joe Young will discuss social media analytics and the COVID-19 infodemic. We look forward to seeing you then, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you again to Professor Laney for putting on such a great webinar.
Thanks. Keep well, everyone.